The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day, I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I have desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Get away from here. Get away from here. Herod wants to kill you. Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you. Last night at dinner church, somebody said this could have been a very short gospel because Jesus could have said, "Okay." But that's not the story that we need to hear. That's not the story that Jesus needed to live out. And so we hear these words today, you really, and it's the Pharisees saying to him, "You really should leave. He really does want to kill you." Before we move any further, I want to just set the context. Remember, we are in the second week of Lent. We enter the second week of Lent. We are working our way towards the cross. In Jesus' life, John the Baptist has been beheaded. Herod has already ordered that killing due to this really, very kind of scandalous story. This could be a great miniseries. Nobody's ever made it, which I think is really unfortunate. Sally, there's your Netflix series. Anyway, Herod, so there was this whole story about Herod's wife and his daughter. At the end of the day, Herod said he felt very conflicted. But he beheaded John anyway, and that's where, in the secular world, we hear John's head was presented on a platter. So at this point, Jesus is going about his work. Jesus has a sense, we imagine, that he knows how this is going to end, although as we get closer to the cross, we will hear Jesus in the garden saying, "You know, God, if you could tell this story and pass me by, I'd be okay with it." But for today, we know that Jesus is staying in the day. Jesus is doing the work that he was called to do. Jesus is kind of keeping his eye on the ball. Jesus' work is to teach and preach and heal and then keep moving. And what can be kind of a fun, I have to always be careful when I read it, but I have yet to be able to read it without having a little flip in my voice. It just feels like Jesus is going, just tell him I've got plans. I'm working, I'm doing this whole thing, and when you're, I've got plans. And what we hear too about that is that Jesus is just so grounded in his relationship with God. Or that's what I hear. He's so grounded in his faith, in his work, and that whatever's going on about him, I mean, we can imagine that he's distraught about John. For a million reasons. And yet, he just needs to stay focused. He needs to remember that God has a larger plan. He needs to remember that his work on this day is to heal and teach and love and do the next right thing. And then we wonder, and we don't hear a lot of Jesus being cranky in Scripture. Go tell that fox. And then it's almost like kind of catches himself, although you can still hear it. It's kind of like, I just want to be this hen that just gathers you all under my wings. I want us to be able to take care of each other. I want us to be able to love and respect and be community. I just keep calling you under my wings, and you repeatedly refuse me. You repeatedly refuse me. So we hear about a fox, which is kind of we imagine the fox being kind of a conniving, kind of sneaky predator. We hear a hen. Now, I've been told I've never brought up chickens or hens, and for the record, I have no interest in learning that skill set. But I know people that have, and they tell me that hens, and roosters particularly, but that hens can get very feisty. That in this part of the story, it's like, I want you gathered under my wings. But it's also a kind of a protection, like, get away from my eggs. Like, there's some feistiness in a hen, from what I've been told. And so when we imagine this story this morning, what are we being called to wonder about today? We are hearing this kind of strength of faith. This kind of, okay, this is where I am in my life, in the story. This is how God has sent me, and I am going to continue to do the work I'm called to do. This week I had the opportunity, and Fran did too, Darla meet, it's the Dover area religious people, for lack of a better word. And we got to hear a woman named Rabbi Shira Stern. She is a pastoral counselor and disaster spiritual care provider for the Red Cross. And she, of course, she apparently had retired from pastoral ministry quite a while ago, but as with many ministers of all traditions, sizes, shapes, and varieties, she would tell you, she has been failing retirement badly. So she became trained as a pastoral counselor for the Red Cross and goes and responds in disaster situations. And she finished her training right before 9/11, when they assured her that she really wouldn't be called very often. She talked about the Red Cross and how their commitment is to be there for everyone, to not ask anyone if someone has a faith tradition and they would like someone to wherever they are, whatever community is, to try and call those clergy in, that it is in no way to usurp or to evangelize. It is to hold and care for the spiritual and emotional, kind of hold that space. Because when we're in the middle of a disaster, there is that soul part too, right? And she said, you never know what's going to happen. We hear Jesus standing, just grounded in his faith. And she went on to tell us a story about, I don't remember which disaster it was, it makes no difference. And she was in one of the shelters and going about and talking to a person, and she came upon this man. And she did what she does, what they all do in their own way. And she asked him how he was and what he needed. She noticed he had tattoos all over the place, and that was not new to her, nor did it faze her at all. She sat down across from him and was talking to him, and he was naturally very upset. She looked down to hold his hand. She asked him if she could hold his hand. He said yes, and as he put his hands out, on one arm she saw a tattoo of Adolf Hitler. Mind you, she's a rabbi. And she said, I took a breath and I just stayed doing what I've been taught to do. I stayed and we asked for help and I listened to him. I didn't put my language in, I didn't think anything, and I looked down and on the other arm, there was a swastika. She talked about the mission of the Red Cross, just holding that place, and how she was so grateful for her faith and for her years in ministry to just be able to stay in that moment and that time. And as she did, she said that, as all those of you that have worked in any of these kinds of situations, she then left the situation, went and found someone who was able to debrief about what it was like for her to be able to just be present with that, and what that spoke, how that spoke to her history and her heart and her soul. Jesus tells us today, just tell that fox I'm busy. Tell that fox I'm busy. I remember as a little kid, I'm now really dating myself, you know when you used to get those little reports and you'd be like, okay, you have to pick somebody to write a report on, you know, and Clara Burton would come up as one, right? There'd be a little picture, right? Like Florence Nightingale, you know? But all of a sudden this week, Clara Burton had a whole new kind of chutzpah in my life. Clara Burton is the woman that started the Red Cross on May 21st, 1881. I don't think I wrote a report on her, and I think that's unfortunate. But I think I may learn a little about her, because she created and worked, and this institution is still going. And I'm sure it has problems. I'm not suggesting that it, like any institution, including the church, is perfect. But I love the idea when this woman was talking, because remember that we Christians can also be pretty interesting. She told another story in another disaster zone where they knew that this group of people were coming in and they weren't allowed to go to a certain place. And they said, no, they weren't. And they streamed in and they started going to everybody and they told all these people that this had happened because God was mad at them. And if they could just be saved by Jesus Christ, all would be well. And she said, you know, that's not the belief of the Red Cross. And so they had to ask them to leave, and these same people threw all of the other literature away and only put out theirs so that people could really be saved. None of us are immune to extreme. None of us are immune to power or prestige or passion. None of us are immune to wanting to share if something has helped you. My hope and prayer is that for those people, they truly felt come to know Jesus in a way that works and moves and lives in your life? We hear this morning of Jesus standing strong in his faith. We hear him saying, you know, I want to love you and gather you. I want to empower you. I want you to know that loving the other, not the kind of like really fun kind of love, which is cool, I've got nothing against it, but that abiding kind of love, that standing beside people, that walking with people when it's hard, when you don't want to, when the wind feels like it's blowing so hard you want so desperately to move. That kind of love. When Jesus knows what's probably going to happen. He knows what happened to John. Please, he says, I've tried. Don't reject me. Don't push me away. I'm here. So as we enter this second week of Lent, I invite us to wonder what it is like to be in that place where we can stand strong in our faith. What allows us to do that when we can, and how is it that we can ask for help when we need to, because Jesus tells us we will all need to. We will all need to be gathered under those wings. If we are human and loved and lovable, if we are loving and caring, we will have times when we will need to be under those wings. Let us not, or let me reframe that in a positive way, let us this week not say thanks, Jesus, but no thanks. Let us just be grounded in that faith. When we see something that is scary and breaks our heart, let us take one more breath and say, gracious God, help me. Hold my head high and to be the person you need me to be today, because some days feel harder than others.